The war was over, but the scars it left behind would take generations to heal. Cities lay in ruins, their streets empty and walls crumbling. The oceans were polluted with debris from battles, and the skies remained streaked with ash. Yet amidst the devastation, there was a sense of hope, a fragile but determined belief that humanity could rebuild. Alex and Emma returned to their research, now working openly in collaboration with Captain Learn and his faction of Valens. Together, they studied the genetic mutations that had allowed humans to resist energy weapons. Their goal was no longer just survival, it was understanding. If they could stabilize the evolutionary changes, future generations wouldn't have to endure the same hardships. We owe it to them, Emma said one evening as she reviewed data under the dim glow of a portable light. They shouldn't have to fight like we did. Jake Riley chose to stay with the Iron Hawks, helping Sarah Myers restore order to the scattered survivor communities. His immunity had made him a symbol of resilience, but he didn't want to be treated as anything special. Instead, he worked tirelessly alongside others, clearing rubble, planting crops, and teaching people how to defend themselves. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about all of us." Daniel Hayes and Rachel Moore traveled across what remained of Earth, seeking out other resistance groups and bringing them together. They shared stories of the war, the sacrifices, the victories, and the lessons learned. Slowly, trust began to grow between strangers who had once been isolated by fear. "We're stronger when we stand together," Daniel told a group of survivors in Kansas. "That's how we'll survive." Captain Learn faced challenges of his own. Many Valens viewed his alliance with humanity as betrayal, and tensions simmered within their ranks. But Learn stood firm, arguing that coexistence was the only way forward. "Our homeworld is dying because we refuse to adapt," he told his officers during a heated meeting aboard his ship. "If we repeat those mistakes here, we will fail again." With time, some Valens began to see the wisdom in his words, though rebuilding trust would take years. Clara Bennett played a key role in fostering peace between the two species. She organized meetings between human leaders and dissenting Valon factions, laying the groundwork for cooperation. Her efforts weren't always successful. Old wounds ran deep, but she persisted, believing that understanding could replace hatred. As months turned into years, small signs of progress emerged. Crops began to grow in soil cleaned of toxins, and children laughed again in places where silence had reigned. Humanity's bodies continued to evolve, adapting not just to survive but to thrive. Alex and Emma discovered that the crystalline structures forming beneath people's skin also enhanced strength and endurance, giving them tools to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But the memory of the war lingered, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. One evening, as Jake stood on a hill overlooking a fledgling settlement, he thought about everything they had endured. The battles, the betrayals, the sacrifices. They had shaped him and everyone else who had lived through them. And yet, despite it all, they had found a way to keep going. "We did it," Rachel said softly, joining him. She handed him a cup of water, her expression thoughtful. "Not perfectly, but we're still here." Jake nodded, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Yeah, we're still here." In the distance, stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. For the first time in years, they looked peaceful, not like threats or reminders of destruction, but like possibilities. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger, its spirit unbroken. As Jake turned back toward the settlement, he felt a quiet certainty settle over him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The final battle began under a sky lit by the glow of distant explosions. Zerk's command ship loomed above the Pacific Ocean, its massive form blotting out the stars. The orbital cannon was nearly operational, its targeting systems locked onto Earth's largest remaining cities. If it fired, millions would die in an instant. Humanity's last chance was to destroy the control hub before it could unleash its full power. Jake Riley led the ground assault, his immunity making him the perfect spearhead for the attack. armed with stolen Valon weapons and accompanied by Daniel Hayes and a small team of resistance fighters. He charged toward the ship's landing bay. Energy beams rained down around them, but Jake didn't flinch. His body absorbed the blasts as he pushed forward, drawing fire away from his comrades. "Keep moving," he shouted over the chaos. "We don't have much time." Above them, Captain Learn's fleet moved into position, engaging Zerk's forces in a fierce space battle. Ships clashed in bursts of light, their weapons tearing through the void. Learn's decision to side with humanity had sparked outrage among the Valon ranks, and his ships were outnumbered. But his pilots fought with determination, knowing their survival depended on stopping Zerk. Meanwhile, Emma and Alex worked frantically inside a makeshift lab near the front lines. They had developed a prototype device capable of neutralizing energy weapons temporarily, but it required precise calibration. "It has to work," Emma muttered as her hands flew over the controls. "If it doesn't, we're all dead." Finally, the device was ready. Rachel Moore volunteered to carry it onto the battlefield, knowing she might not make it back. She strapped the small, glowing device to her belt and joined the advancing troops, dodging blasts as she ran toward the ship. When she reached the landing bay, she activated the device. For a brief moment, the air shimmered as the energy fields surrounding the Valon's weapons collapsed. The resistance fighters seized the opportunity, pouring into the ship while the enemy was vulnerable. Inside, the corridors were a maze of flashing lights and alarms. Daniel and Jake led the way, following Learn's map to the control hub. Along the way, they encountered squads of Valon soldiers, their weapons recharging as the effects of the device wore off. The fighting was brutal, but the humans pressed on, driven by desperation. "We're close," Daniel yelled as they turned a corner and saw the massive doors of the control room ahead. Zerk himself awaited them inside, his towering form clad in gleaming armor. He sneered at the intruders, raising his weapon. "You think you can stop us? You're too late." Behind him, the orbital cannon hummed with energy, its countdown ticking closer to zero. Jake stepped forward, his crystalline skin glowing faintly. "Maybe we are too late," he said, his voice steady. "But we'll take you down with us." The room erupted into chaos as the two sides clashed. Zerk fought with terrifying strength, his energy blade cutting through anything in its path. But the humans refused to give up. Using teamwork and sheer willpower, they overwhelmed the Valon leader, forcing him to retreat. With seconds to spare, Alex managed to disable the cannon's targeting system, causing it to overload and explode harmlessly in space. As the dust settled, the survivors looked around at the wreckage. The cost had been high, many lives lost, but they had won. Outside, Learn's ships secured victory against Zerk's forces, signaling the end of the war. For the first time in years, there was silence. Jake leaned against a wall, exhausted but alive. The road ahead would be long, but humanity had proven its resilience, and as he looked at the faces of his friends, he knew they would rebuild together. The destruction of the Valon supply depot was a turning point, but it wasn't enough to end the war. The data logs Emma and Alex had recovered painted a grim picture. The orbital cannon was already in its final stages of construction. If completed, it would unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale, capable of wiping out entire cities with a single shot. The group knew they couldn't fight such a weapon with rifles and makeshift explosives. They needed help, inside help. Clara Bennett, the diplomat who had survived the failed peace meeting, still believed that not all Valons supported the invasion. She had spent weeks analyzing their behavior during the encounter, noting subtle signs of disagreement among the officers. "They're not a united force," she told Daniel and Sarah one evening. "Some of them are as desperate as we are." Her words sparked an idea. What if they could reach out to those dissenting voices? It was a dangerous gamble, but it might be their only chance. Clara volunteered to try, knowing the risks involved. "If I can find someone willing to listen, maybe we can work together to stop Zerk," she said firmly. Her tone left no room for argument. With Jake's help, Clara managed to send a message through encrypted channels stolen from the depot. She identified herself as a human seeking peace and included evidence of the orbital cannon's plans, hoping to appeal to any Valons who doubted their leader's methods. Days passed without a response, and hope began to fade. Then, late one night, a reply came. Captain Lern, a high-ranking Valon officer, agreed to meet under strict conditions. The location was a derelict satellite orbiting Earth, neutral ground where neither side could bring reinforcements. Clara prepared carefully, knowing her life depended on this meeting. Accompanying her were Rachel and Alex, chosen for their quick thinking and calm under pressure. The journey to the satellite was nerve-wracking, with everyone aware that betrayal could mean instant death. When they arrived, Captain Lern greeted them cautiously. His armor gleamed faintly in the dim light, and his glowing eyes studied them intently. "You claim you want peace," he said, his voice low and measured. "But why should I trust you?" Clara stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of goodwill. "Because your leader is leading your people to destruction. The orbital cannon won't save your world. It will doom ours, and then yours. Is that what you want?" Lern hesitated, clearly conflicted. He admitted that many within the Valon ranks questioned Zerk's tactics. "We didn't come here to exterminate you," he said finally. "We came because we have no other choice. But if there's another way—" "There is," Alex interrupted, stepping forward. "Our research shows humans are adapting to resist your weapons. If both sides stop fighting, we can focus on finding solutions, not just for Earth, but for your people too." The conversation stretched into hours, each side weighing the risks and benefits of cooperation. In the end, Lern agreed to help sabotage the orbital cannon in exchange for assurances that humanity would assist the Valons in finding alternative resources. It was a fragile truce, built on mutual desperation, but it was a start. Back on Earth, Daniel and Sarah worked to rally their forces. With Lern's intel, they planned a coordinated assault on the orbital cannon's control hub, located aboard Zerk's command ship. The mission would require precision and timing, but failure wasn't an option. If they succeeded, they could cripple the Valon's ability to wage war. As preparations began, Jake stood quietly, staring up at the stars. He thought about how far they'd come, from scattered survivors hiding in ruins to forging alliances with former enemies. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. And for the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to believe they might actually win. The raid on the Valon supply depot was set for the night of a new moon, when the sky would be at its darkest. The plan was risky but necessary. If they succeeded, they could cripple the Valon's operations in the region and gain access to valuable resources. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. Everyone knew the stakes, and the mood among the group was tense but focused. Sarah Myers led the mission, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon as they approached the depot. The facility was located in the barren plains of Texas, surrounded by high walls and guarded by automated turrets. It was a fortress designed to keep intruders out, but Sarah had spent days studying its layout. She knew the weak points, the blind spots in the cameras, the gaps in the patrols. "We strike fast and hard," she told the group during their final briefing. No hesitation. Jake Riley volunteered to lead the initial assault. His immunity made him the perfect distraction, drawing the attention of the guards while the others slipped inside. He carried only a stolen Valon weapon, knowing it wouldn't harm him. "Just make sure you're ready to move when I give the signal," he said to Daniel, who nodded grimly. As they neared the depot, the group split into teams. Jake moved ahead, staying low and using the cover of darkness to approach the outer wall. When he reached the entrance, he fired his weapon into the air, creating a burst of light that immediately triggered alarms. Valon soldiers swarmed toward him, their weapons glowing with energy. Jake stood his ground, letting the beams hit him again and again. The crystalline structures beneath his skin absorbed the blasts, leaving him unharmed. He grinned despite the danger, knowing his role was working perfectly. Inside the depot, chaos erupted as the guards rushed to deal with Jake. Taking advantage of the confusion, Daniel and Rachel led their team through a side entrance Sarah had identified. They moved quickly, disabling cameras and taking out isolated patrols. The air was thick with tension as they navigated the narrow corridors, their footsteps muffled by the hum of machinery. Alex and Emma stayed close behind, carrying the fireproof case with their research. They weren't fighters, but they were determined to protect their work at all costs. The heart of the depot was a massive storage room filled with crates of weapons, ammunition, and strange alien devices. Daniel signaled for everyone to spread out and begin gathering what they could. Sarah joined them moments later, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "We don't have much time," she warned. "Reinforcements will be here soon." As they worked, Emma noticed something unusual, a set of data logs stored in a secure terminal. She called Alex over, and together they managed to bypass the encryption. What they found was shocking. Plans for a massive orbital cannon capable of obliterating entire cities. The Valons were preparing to escalate the war, targeting humanity's last strongholds. "We need to destroy this place," Emma said urgently. "If they finish building that weapon, it's over." Daniel agreed without hesitation. "Plant the charges and get out. We'll blow the whole thing." The group worked quickly, setting explosives throughout the storage room. As they finished, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Reinforcements had arrived. "Go!" Daniel shouted, pushing everyone toward the exit. They barely made it out in time. As they reached the safety of the planes, the depot exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending shockwaves rippling across the ground. For a moment, there was silence as the survivors caught their breath. Then, cheers broke out. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Valons. But the victory was bittersweet. The data logs revealed just how far the Valons were willing to go to secure Earth's resources. Humanity's fight was far from over, and the cost of survival continued to rise. As they regrouped under the pale light of dawn, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The days following the attack were grim. The survivors moved cautiously through the forest, avoiding open areas and sticking to shadows. Food was scarce, and morale was at an all-time low. Daniel Hayes took charge of the group, leading them westward in search of allies. He knew they couldn't face the Valons alone, not after what had happened at the compound. They needed help, and they needed it fast. Alex and Emma carried their research with them, the heavy fireproof case a constant reminder of what they stood to lose. They worked whenever they could, jotting down notes and analyzing samples by the dim light of campfires. But progress was slow, hindered by exhaustion and fear. "We're running out of time," Emma muttered one evening as she reviewed their data. "If we don't figure this out soon, it won't matter how many people adapt." "We'll make it work," Alex replied, though his voice lacked confidence. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but he refused to give up. Humanity's survival depended on their success. Jake Riley walked ahead of the group, scouting for danger. His immunity made him fearless, but it also made him a target. Every time the Valons attacked, he stepped forward to draw their fire, knowing his body could withstand the blasts. It was a burden he carried silently, though the strain was evident in his tired eyes. "You don't have to do this every time," Rachel told him one night as they rested. "You're not invincible." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Jake replied. "But if I can protect even one person, it's worth it." Their journey eventually led them to Colorado Springs, where rumors spoke of a militia group called the Iron Hawks. Led by a woman named Sarah Myers, the Iron Hawks had carved out a small territory in the ruins of the city. When Daniel approached their camp, he found it heavily fortified, with guards posted at every entrance. Sarah herself was a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features and a commanding presence. She listened carefully as Daniel explained who they were and why they had come. "You want us to join your fight?" Sarah asked, her tone skeptical. "What makes you think we'd risk our necks for strangers?" Before Daniel could respond, Jake stepped forward. Without saying a word, he pulled out a stolen Valon weapon and fired it directly at his chest. The energy beam struck him full force, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly as the crystalline structures beneath his skin absorbed the blast. Gasps rippled through the crowd of Ironhawks watching. Sarah stared at Jake, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "All right, you've got my attention." Over the next few days, the two groups worked together to plan their next move. Sarah proposed targeting a Valon supply depot in Texas, where weapons and resources were stockpiled. "If we hit them hard enough, we can cripple their operations," she said. "But it won't be easy." Daniel agreed. Nothing ever is. As preparations began, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Some members of the Ironhawks doubted whether humanity could win against the Valons, no matter how many adapted to resist their weapons. Others questioned Jake's immunity, wondering if it could truly be replicated. Despite the doubts, there was a shared determination to fight back. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered among the survivors. Unbeknownst to them, Eric Dawson had found refuge with the Valons. In exchange for protection, he provided them with information about the Resistance's movements. Though he tried to justify his actions, guilt gnawed at him. He told himself that survival was all that mattered. But deep down, he knew he had betrayed his own kind. Back at the Ironhawks camp, Alex and Emma continued their research, driven by the belief that humanity's resilience could turn the tide of the war. If they succeeded, the raid on the supply depot might be just the beginning. But failure wasn't an option. Not anymore. The first sign of trouble came in the early hours of the morning. A low rumble shook the compound, waking everyone from their sleep. At first, Alex thought it was an earthquake, but then he heard the unmistakable hum of Valon ships overhead. He rushed to the lab window, his heart pounding, and saw flashes of light cutting through the darkness. The attack had begun. Daniel Hayes was already shouting orders, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get to your positions. Defend the perimeter." Resistance fighters scrambled to grab their weapons, their faces pale but determined. Jake Riley moved quickly, helping Emma secure the lab equipment before joining the others at the barricades. Alex stayed behind, frantically gathering their research notes. If the compound fell, they couldn't let the Valons get their hands on the data. Outside, chaos erupted. Energy beams sliced through the air, striking walls and sending debris flying. The Resistance fighters returned fire with outdated rifles, their bullets bouncing harmlessly off the Valons' armored ships. Despite the odds, they fought fiercely, refusing to give up without a fight. Rachel Moore stood beside Daniel, her hand steady as she aimed her weapon. "Hold the line," Daniel yelled, firing into the swarm of advancing aliens. Inside the lab, Emma worked to shut down the sensitive equipment. Her hands trembled as she unplugged cables and stuffed papers into a fireproof case. "We need to get out of here," Alex said, grabbing her arm. "It's not safe." "I can't leave this," Emma replied, her voice tight with panic. "If we lose it, everything we've done is gone." "We'll carry it with us," Alex insisted. Together, they hoisted the heavy case and ran toward the exit, dodging falling debris as explosions rocked the building. By the time they reached the main hall, the situation was dire. The Valons had breached the outer defenses, their towering forms looming over the compound. Resistance fighters fell one by one, overwhelmed by superior firepower. Jake took cover behind a collapsed wall, using his immunity to draw enemy fire. He shouted for survivors to fall back, his voice cutting through the noise. "Retreat. Get to the tunnels." The tunnels were their last hope, a network of underground passages that led away from the compound. Daniel had prepared them as an escape route, knowing they might need it someday. As the remaining fighters regrouped, he made a quick head count. Too many were missing, their bodies left behind in the chaos. Among them was Kevin Holt, the medic who had survived the failed peace meeting. His sacrifice allowed others to escape, but the loss weighed heavily on everyone. As they fled through the dark, narrow tunnels, Alex couldn't stop thinking about Eric Dawson. Had he betrayed them? It seemed impossible to believe, but the timing was too coincidental. "We'll deal with it later," Emma said when he voiced his suspicions. "Right now, we need to focus on staying alive." The group emerged hours later in a dense forest miles away from the compound. Exhausted and battered, they set up a temporary camp. Daniel paced back and forth, his face grim. "They knew exactly where to find us," he said, his voice filled with anger. "Someone told them." No one spoke. The weight of Eric's betrayal hung over them like a shadow. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Valens would be searching for them, and they needed a new plan. For now, survival was their only priority. Jake sat quietly by the fire, staring into the flames. His body was still resistant, but it didn't feel like enough. They had lost so much. Friends, comrades, their home. Yet, even in the face of despair, he refused to give up. "We'll keep fighting," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Because we have to." The mood in the Chicago compound grew darker with each passing day. The failed peace meeting in New York had dashed any lingering hopes of ending the war through diplomacy. Daniel Hayes spent most of his time pacing the command center, poring over maps and strategizing their next move. Rachel Moore stood by his side, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. Meanwhile, Alex and Emma worked tirelessly in their lab, trying to unlock the secrets of humanity's evolving resistance to the Valon weapons. Jake Riley became a key part of their experiments. His body continued to adapt at an astonishing rate, the crystalline structures beneath his skin growing more pronounced with each test. He endured energy blasts that would have killed anyone else, emerging unscathed and determined. "Keep going," he told Alex and Emma after one particularly intense session. "If this can save people, I'll do whatever it takes." But progress was slow. For every success, there were setbacks. Some volunteers suffered severe burns or collapsed from exhaustion, unable to handle the stress of repeated exposure. Emma felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. "We're asking too much of them," she said one night as she and Alex reviewed the data. "What if we push someone too far? What if they don't survive?" "We don't have a choice," Alex replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "If we stop now, we lose everything." Despite the risks, word of Jake's immunity spread quickly among the resistance fighters. Morale improved as people began to believe that survival was possible. Soldiers who once feared the Valon weapons now trained harder, inspired by the idea that their bodies might one day resist the deadly beams. Even Daniel allowed himself a flicker of hope. "If we can protect even half our people," he said during a briefing, "we stand a chance." But not everyone shared this optimism. Eric Dawson watched the experiments with growing unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was fighting a losing battle. The Valons were too powerful, their technology too advanced. No amount of adaptation could level the playing field in his mind. Late one night, he slipped away from the compound, carrying a stolen map marked with its location. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but fear had taken hold of him. Survival, he reasoned, was all that mattered. Unaware of Eric's betrayal, Alex and Emma pushed forward with their research. They began testing new theories, exposing volunteers to weaker energy bursts in controlled environments. The goal was to trigger the mutations without causing harm. One volunteer, a young woman named Lisa Carter, showed promising results. Her skin developed a faint shimmer, almost like metal, and she reported feeling less pain during the tests. "It's working," Emma said excitedly. "We're getting closer." As the days passed, Jake became a symbol of defiance within the compound. Soldiers cheered when he walked by, and civilians whispered stories about his immunity. But Jake didn't let the attention go to his head. He remained focused, knowing that his survival meant nothing if others couldn't follow in his footsteps. "This isn't just about me," He told Alex one evening, "It's about everyone. We do this together, or not at all." Meanwhile, tensions outside the compound were rising. Patrols reported increased violent activity in the area, though no direct attacks had occurred yet. Daniel ordered double shifts for the guards and reinforced the compound's defenses. "They're planning something," he warned the group. "Stay alert." Alex and Emma barely noticed the heightened security. They were too consumed by their work, driven by the belief that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. If they could replicate Jake's immunity in others, humanity might finally have a fighting chance. But time was running out, and Eric Dawson's betrayal was about to bring the war straight to their doorstep. The Valons were not mindless invaders. They were a species driven by desperation, their homeworld dying and their resources nearly depleted. Earth, with its vast oceans and rich core, had seemed like the perfect solution to their problems. But they hadn't anticipated humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. The Valons saw humans as primitive, chaotic, and ultimately expendable. Yet, despite their advanced technology, they couldn't wipe out the resistance entirely. Commander Zerk, the leader of the invasion force, was growing frustrated. His subordinates reported that human survivors were adapting in ways they couldn't explain. At first, he dismissed these claims as rumors, but when evidence began to pile up, reports of soldiers surviving direct hits from energy weapons, he knew something was wrong. Humanity wasn't supposed to evolve so quickly. It defied logic. Zerk decided it was time to try diplomacy again. He ordered his second-in-command to arrange a meeting with human leaders. "If we can't destroy them, perhaps we can negotiate," he said coldly. But this time, no mistakes. The chosen location for the meeting was an abandoned stadium on the outskirts of New York City. Both sides agreed to send representatives, though trust was non-existent. On the human side, Clara Bennett, a former diplomat who had survived the initial invasion, volunteered to lead the peace envoy. She was calm under pressure and believed that coexistence might still be possible. Accompanying her were two guards armed with outdated rifles and a medic named Kevin Holt. As they approached the stadium, Clara felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. The Valon's sleek metallic ships hovered overhead, their hum vibrating through the air. Inside the crumbling structure, a group of Valon officers waited, their towering forms clad in shimmering armor. Their leader, a tall alien with glowing green eyes, stepped forward to greet Clara. "We seek peace," the Valon officer said in halting English. "Our goal is survival, not destruction." Clara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Then stop attacking us. Leave Earth, and we'll find another way to help your people." The conversation started cautiously, each side wary of the other's intentions. For a moment, it seemed like progress might be possible. But then, chaos erupted. A distant explosion shook the stadium, sending debris raining down. Someone, no one could tell which side, had sabotaged the meeting. Gunfire rang out as both human and Valon forces scrambled for cover. Clara ducked behind a crumbling wall, her heart pounding. She shouted for everyone to stand down, but her voice was drowned out by the noise of battle. One of her guards fell, hit by a stray energy blast, while Kevin dragged the other to safety. Through the smoke and confusion, Clara saw the Valon leader raise his weapon, his expression unreadable. When the dust settled, the stadium was littered with bodies. Most of Clara's team lay dead or wounded, and the Valon officers retreated to their ships without another word. Clara knelt beside Kevin, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why does this keep happening?" News of the failed meeting spread quickly, reaching Daniel Hayes and his resistance fighters in Chicago. When Rachel relayed the details, the mood in the compound turned grim. "They'll never stop," Daniel said bitterly. "Even if some of them want peace, the rest won't listen." Jake Riley clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. "Then we make them listen. We show them we're not just going to roll over and die." Alex and Emma listened silently, their thoughts heavy. They had hoped for a chance to end the war without more bloodshed, but now it seemed impossible. The Valens viewed humanity as a threat, and diplomacy had failed once again. As they returned to their lab, Alex muttered, "If talking won't work, maybe science will." Emma glanced at him, her expression troubled. "Let's hope it's enough." Unbeknownst to them, Eric Dawson had already made contact with the Valens. In exchange for protection, he promised to deliver the location of the Resistance's hideout. The betrayal would soon shatter the fragile sense of security the group had built, and test whether humanity's newfound resilience was truly enough to survive. Rachel Moore proved to be a skilled guide, navigating the harsh Alaskan terrain with precision. She was quiet and focused, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Alex and Emma followed closely behind, their packs filled with research notes, samples, and fragile equipment. The journey to Chicago was long and perilous, but they had no choice. Staying in Alaska meant risking discovery by the Valens, or worse, having their work fall into the wrong hands. As they traveled south, the scars of the war became more visible. Burnt-out cars littered the highways, and skeletal remains of buildings stood like tombstones against the gray sky. Rachel explained that the Valens often patrolled these areas, searching for survivors. "They don't care if you're armed or not," she said grimly. "If they find you, they'll kill you." Despite the danger, Alex couldn't stop thinking about their discovery. He replayed Emma's words in his mind. Our bodies are rewriting themselves to survive. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. If they could figure out how to accelerate this process, humanity might stand a chance. But first, they needed to reach Daniel Hayes and the resistance fighters hiding in Chicago. After days of travel, they finally arrived at the outskirts of the city. What was once a bustling metropolis was now a shadow of its former self. Crumbling skyscrapers loomed over streets choked with debris. Yet amidst the destruction, there were signs of life. Smoke rising from hidden camps, faint voices carried on the wind. Rachel led them through a maze of abandoned buildings until they reached a fortified compound buried deep underground. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Dozens of men and women moved about, some cleaning weapons, others tending to the wounded. At the center of it all was Daniel Hayes, a tall man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He greeted Rachel with a nod before turning his attention to Alex and Emma. "You're the scientists?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes," Alex replied, stepping forward. "We've made a discovery that could change everything. We think humans are evolving to resist the Valon weapons." Daniel listened intently as Alex explained their findings. When he finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Daniel spoke. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to act fast. Every day, more people die. If we can protect even a fraction of them." "But it's not ready yet," Emma interrupted. "We need time to study it further, to understand how it works. Right now, it's unpredictable." Daniel frowned. "Time is something we don't have. The Valons are getting bolder. They're closing in on us. And if they find this place..." He didn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen. Over the next few days, Alex and Emma set up a makeshift lab in one corner of the compound. They began running tests on volunteers, hoping to identify patterns in the mutations. One of the first to step forward was Jake Riley, a former construction worker who had lost his family to the invasion. His arms bore jagged scars from previous encounters with the Valens, but his determination was unshakable. "Do whatever you need to do," he told them. "If it means keeping others alive, I'm in." The experiments were grueling. Volunteers subjected themselves to controlled bursts of energy, carefully calibrated to avoid fatal injury. Many suffered burns or collapsed from exhaustion, but Jake showed remarkable resilience. After several sessions, Alex noticed something extraordinary: tiny crystalline structures forming just beneath Jake's skin. These structures seemed to absorb and dissipate the energy, leaving him unharmed. "It's working," Emma whispered one night as they reviewed the data. His body is adapting faster than anyone else's. Jake became a symbol of hope within the compound. Soldiers and civilians alike watched in awe as he shrugged off blasts that would have killed an ordinary person. Word of his immunity spread quickly, boosting morale among the resistance fighters. For the first time in months, there was a sense that victory might be possible. But not everyone shared this optimism. Eric Dawson, a member of the group, grew increasingly uneasy. He had joined the resistance out of desperation, but lately he'd begun to doubt whether fighting was worth the cost. Late one night, he slipped away from the compound, carrying secrets that could jeopardize everything Alex, Emma, and the others had worked for. Unaware of the betrayal unfolding around them, Alex and Emma continued their research, driven by the belief that they were on the verge of something groundbreaking. Little did they know, their greatest challenge was yet to come. In the year 2147, Earth was no longer the vibrant blue planet it once was. The skies were darkened by smoke from endless battles, and cities lay in ruins. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction by an alien race called the Valens. These invaders came with weapons unlike anything humans had ever seen. Energy beams that could disintegrate flesh and bone in an instant. There was no defense against them, no way to fight back effectively. It seemed like all hope was lost. But deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, a small group of scientists worked tirelessly in a hidden research facility. Among them was Alex Carter, a young biologist with sharp eyes and a restless mind. He spent most of his days examining tissue samples taken from survivors who had somehow lived through encounters with the Valon weapons. Something about these people intrigued him. They weren't just lucky. There was something different about their bodies. Emma Lewis, another scientist of the lab, noticed Alex's growing obsession. She was methodical and calm, a perfect balance to his relentless curiosity. One evening, as they sat together in the dim glow of their equipment, Emma asked, "What are you looking for, Alex? You've been staring at those slides for hours." "I don't know yet," Alex replied, squinting at the microscope. "But there's something here. Look at this sample. It doesn't match any normal human cell structure. See how the fibers are denser. Almost like they're adapting." Emma leaned closer, her brow furrowing as she studied the image. "That's impossible. Cells don't change that quickly. Not unless—" Her voice trailed off as realization dawned on her face. "Unless they're evolving." The two researchers exchanged a glance. If what they suspected was true, it meant humanity wasn't entirely helpless after all. Over the next few weeks, they ran countless tests, comparing samples from survivors to those who hadn't encountered the Valon weapons. The results were astonishing. In every case, the survivors showed signs of genetic mutation. Tiny changes in their DNA that made their cells more resistant to energy-based attacks. At first, the mutations were subtle. Some survivors developed thicker skin, while others had slight alterations in their muscle tissue. But as Alex and Emma dug deeper, they found evidence of even more dramatic changes. One man, who had survived multiple direct hits, had traces of crystalline structures forming beneath his skin. These structures appeared to deflect or absorb the energy blasts, protecting his vital organs. "This is incredible," Emma whispered one night as they pored over their findings. "It's like our bodies are rewriting themselves to survive." "But why now?" Alex wondered aloud. "Why only some people? And can we make it happen faster?" Their discovery offered a glimmer of hope in a world consumed by despair, but it also raised difficult questions. Was this evolution random, or could it be controlled? Could they use this knowledge to protect others before it was too late? As word of their work began to spread, the scientists knew they were running out of time. The Valons weren't just destroying cities, they were systematically hunting down survivors. If Alex and Emma wanted to share their findings with the rest of humanity, they would need help. They needed someone brave enough to get them out of Alaska and into the hands of the resistance fighters scattered across the globe. Little did they know, their chance would come sooner than expected. A messenger named Rachel Moore arrived at the lab one freezing morning, sent by a rebel leader named Daniel Hayes. She carried a desperate plea for assistance and a promise of protection. For Alex and Emma, it was the opportunity they had been waiting for. But leaving the safety of their lab meant stepping into a war zone where danger lurked around every corner. As they packed up their notes and prepared to leave, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their discovery might be humanity's last hope. Whether it would be enough to turn the tide of the war remained to be seen.